Okay, good afternoon, Tom. Thank you very much for the introduction and the invitation to be here. I just learned from your past president that I've been here 18 years ago, and talking to you at that time when I just became the first non-American president of INCOSE at that time, and spent a lot of effort making INCOSE a bit more international, because when I joined them, well, they were focused on Texas and other regions. So this has substantially changed, and I'm rather happy about this. In fact, we had the very first European Congress in Brighton and then in Toulouse under my chairmanship. This was a revelation for all the American members who were there, because Toulouse, France, and these complicated French people, this was a breakthrough in many ways. Anyway, today I'm here just as a past president, but as an engaged member of the INCOSE Vision team. In fact, one of the things I've done during my watch in INCOSE was to set a vision. The very first vision that INCOSE ever took was taken during my incoming presidency period, because I'm convinced that one of the services that INCOSE can give to its members and beyond is showing the members where do we go from here. And if you follow some of the discussions around MBSE, our fellows just have a major discussion on this one. Well, one conclusion, reading all of this, most people don't know where this all leads to. So giving a perspective of where system engineering is moving and in which context it is moving is a service which INCOSE does. And I've been ever since involved in the Vision 25 and now in the Vision 35, because it's a service, if you will, from my own intellectual background and my space background. I've had the chance to work on systems engineering in practical ways of getting projects done, satellites up into orbit, etc., etc. And that's something which taught me systems engineering massively in a practical way, in an engineering and product-oriented way. And this is not necessarily what you find when you study the literature of system engineering. It's very much process-oriented, and to some extent a bit aloof. Okay, having said this, I think my first chart doesn't come up, but I'm sure Tom can do something about it. There is, oh yeah, I just wanted to share some entirely different thoughts with you. And Tom just referred to space. My way of looking at how our students, and I tell my students all the time, should govern this world is the way we govern the ISS. There is Egyptians, there is South Americans, there's Russians, there's Ukrainians, there is all nations on in this International Space Station. And they get along very, very well with each other. Even now, there's Russian up there, there's Americans up there. They get along because they have the same purpose. We need to understand our purpose is the Earth, to preserve this planet Earth. That's our purpose. And these borders, Tom just mentioned that, these borders, which are essentially administrative districts, need to go away as we mature as a humankind. So what's happening there in this circle there disturbs me a lot. Disturbs me a lot for lots of reasons. My father, my grandfathers all have been in war, etc. And I never thought that we will have a situation like this again in Europe. So I just wanted to share that with you because it bothers me a lot, and I'm sure it bothers you a lot, because what's happening there is absolutely inhumane and stupid. Okay, I just wanted to share that with you. It bugs me a lot. So What am I going to talk about? The Vision 2035. It comes in 4 chapters, same chapters as we had for 25, namely the global context. I always say our system engineers need to understand in which context the systems need to be created, need to be designed, need to be related to, etc., etc. Then a short paragraph, a short chapter on what's the current state of system engineering, where are we? And then chapter 3, where are we going to go? What's the future? The next 10, 15 years and more and less. And finally, how we're going to intend to realize the vision, i.e. make it happen. Because in the end, visions are wonderful, but if nobody does anything about them, they're useless. Therefore, for the bibliothek. Okay, for the bibliothek. So let me start. The vision comes in a printed copy. Tom has mentioned that. It comes in a downloadable PDF. It's the www.incose.org/sevision. And it comes in a web version and briefing charts. In fact, these briefing charts, which I'm using today, we're going to upload again, and everybody can use them to whatever purpose they want to use them. This entire vision is open to use for everybody. That's a breakthrough, and I come back to this point a little later. Tom, can we take the menu away? Yes. The menu, the side menu.
This one.
Yeah, good. Good. So the way. Okay, fair enough. Okay, now. So that little menu.
Yeah, it's not that one. It's okay. No,
okay. The purpose, Tom has already essentially said it, is to inspire and guide the strategic direction across many in the community, and to help, of course, also align a number of the activities that are going on within INCOSE and outside INCOSE. So that's the objectives. The core team is a rather interesting compilation of people that have nothing to do with space, except for me. All others come from different domains, like Ford Motor Company or IBM or Lutheran Electronics, because we wanted to have a good representation of younger and older, and people from all kinds of industries and organizations come together. And we've had plenty of support people, but you have these in the handout, and I'm not going to go into it. First chapter, the global context, where Dave Nichols, my good friend, and I had spent a lot of time in, and very compatible times in. Questions to answer: Will social economic changes influence systems and SE? It's a tautological question, obviously, but one which is important. Which are the real important megatrends which have an influence on systems engineering? Which are the technologies that have an effect on the nature of systems? And how will the enterprise developments and the stakeholder expectations influence systems engineering? And the first point, a starting point, is a chart which you've probably seen many times. It's the United Nations Sustainable Goals, because they are kind of a proxy for human needs. And human needs is a starting point for the raison d'etre for us engineers to do something which helps better improve our daily lives, essentially. So I'm not going to go into those, you know them probably all, but each of those, and this is the point to be made, require comprehensive system solutions to be solved. And any of those, and we've had a discussion this morning on space and other systems, here are the real broad system challenges, because they are involving lots of things to solve whether that's infrastructure or whether that's health or whatever else. There's lots of things to be done there. So the mega trends. What are the key mega trends which affect our systems world? Sustainability, I don't think I need to go into explaining that one. Interdependent world. Well, at the moment with the Russian crisis, it's becoming a little bit less interdependent, even though it's at the moment even more interdependent, but the result will be a little less interdependent because of the consequences. The digital transformation, don't need to talk about. Industry 4.0 and Society 5.0. Has anybody of you heard of these two terms? Yes, 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 most of you, okay. Smart systems, all of you have heard about everything, whether that's a thermostat or whether that's a computer or whether that's a projector, everything is becoming smarter and smarter, which means full of sensory, full of feedback, etc. And complexity growth is a standard term because we are making lots of information technologies, sensoric, etc. We're making our systems are growing more complex. Okay, there's two places. I'm going to go three places where I'm going to go a little bit more detail. The digital transformation, Industry 4.0, and sustainability, because they have lots of particular implications. The sustainability megatrend has an associated element, namely circular economy. The circular economy approach, I don't know whether that's being discussed in Sweden a lot or not. Tom says yes, is really, then I don't need to explain it. It is changing the approach to resources. It's changing our approach to how we use systems in many ways. Here's a good example, a bit of an advertising for the company of my son, who is working as an engineer, obviously. BMW just introduced a new car, which is not on the market yet, but will be on the market somewhere 24, 25, where they've taken an entirely different approach. All the materials they use there are reusable. The approach they're taking is a different approach to repairing, to building a car modular and reusing components from car X to car Y to car Z. So they're changing entirely the approach of how they want to eventually build cars as a result of the sustainability pressure which is upon them. After beer later, we can talk about this more detail. Anyway, the next point is technologies. There's lots of technologies around there, and some of the technologies like 6G are relatively on the horizon. We'll enter 6G probably 25, 26, that period of time. But edge computing, I don't know how many of you have been involved with edge computing, is also happening slowly. In many ways, quantum science, quantum information is on the verge of becoming a very important element in our lives, and particularly also in system life and system tools. And I come back to that to some extent. It is probably going to mature in about 10 years or so, mature to the point that it's affordable for normal industry and other applications. So these technologies have an influence on systems, and in turn, this is why this little well-known symbol is there. In turn, technologies are shaped by system demands. I've while I was in the European Space Agency, I had next to the system engineering department also the technology R&D under me, and I've really pushed that element. My system engineers needed to know what are the new technologies that are coming up, because we're creating new systems with new technologies. Okay, there's one more missing, which one was missing? Autonomy and artificial intelligence. I come back to artificial intelligence, not as much as I'd like to, but it is massively changing the way we're going to build, design, and operate systems. So I think the message is clear. The other message I want to pass with you is the stakeholder expectations change as part of the societal changes that we have. And there's lots of S there, simple systems. People don't want complexity in their day-to-day lives, whether that's driving a car or whether it's buying a thermostat or whatever. They want simple systems. The market wants simple systems. And it's an art to make simple systems, certainly safe systems, secure systems, smart systems, stable, predictable, maintainable, socially acceptable, affordable, and scalable. If you look at certainly on, for example, on the defense side, the scalability has become a very important criteria of stakeholders' expectations. But the center of this one is, and this is anticipating a societal development, is ethical and trustworthy. This trustworthy is kind of a theme throughout our vision, because we've debated that intensely in all kinds of directions. Think of Facebook, Apple, Microsoft. What, in your judgment, next from the services they provide, is one of the differentiations that you have when you think of those three? Who do you trust more? Who do you trust less? Your smile gives me the answer. The point is, it's going to be a much more important criteria in the future compared to what it was in the past. And if you think of the cyber aspects, and I come back to those, this trustworthy in many ways is a criteria which we will be confronted with as system people, system engineers, much more than in the past. So in summary, the systems of the future will be aligning with global trends. The economy and society become smarter, self-organized. It's an important element, in part with AI, sustainable and trusted. And I talked about technologies a lot. We come back to tools in a little while and face challenges which, due to complexity, increase our predictability is going to be impaired. I give you a very practical example. For me, a key example which really shook me up. Opportunity, you know, I have a space background. The Opportunity rover runs around Mars. It was the first space system, to my knowledge, at least to which I came across, that was not testable in all of its functions. For a car, it doesn't matter, but for sending something up to space, we were used to being able to test every possible functional interactions. This one was becoming so complex that we could not test everything anymore. And sending something to Mars without being able to predict 100% correct how it's going to be behaving was a shock. But we took the risk. My friends in JPL took the risk and said, look, we need another 2 or 3 years before we have it all tested out. We can't afford it, so let's go. So it's a point of challenges associated with complexity and predictability. So the second chapter, The Current State, by Paul Nielsen from Carnegie Mellon and Sky Matthews from IBM, where the principal leads there. Little hobby of mine, you go in the literature, system engineering was invented in the 1950s. Well, this is nonsense. It was formalized in the 1950s, but all throughout, how could they have built these fantastic sailing ships or the early cars or others without system engineering? They just didn't call it this way. But made. So we see that in the literature, cross it out, nonsense. It's not true. Anyway, another observation, Tom alluded to it already, is we have, when I joined INCOSE in the 90s, we had predominantly aerospace. There were some other disciplines came up today. It is rather very, very broadly present. And even in INCOSE and outside INCOSE, system engineering is being debated. You mentioned Heike in banks. Yes, of course. So they wouldn't have thought of it 20 years ago, I'm sure. So next point. We need system engineers at many tiers of a product. This is not in the vision. That's a chart which I've introduced. That's why I called my presentation an amended one. I have a few more charts. We keep on talking about the system engineers at the top of the architecture. Well, if you look into the reality, the suspension system or the electrical system for car, the data system and the software, they are systems in themselves. And we need system engineers at every one of those levels. Of course, we also need it at the integrated mechanical, the integrated avionics, and the integrated vehicle, but we need them also there. So autonomous driving is a system mess anyway. The same thing goes with my rocket example. We have system engineers at every one of those systems, but we also have them for every one of the stages and for the integrated rocket, etc. It's also something which you do not find often in the system engineering literature, but it's a fact of life. And I come back to this. We don't create in the universities integrated vehicle system engineers. We create suspension engineers, mechanical engineers, acoustic engineers. They eventually could possibly become system engineers. Point I feel very strong about because it's reality. Now, this chart shows that system engineering practices are evolving. And I very much want to underline this word evolving, because people think we have now MBSE, it's a step function. This is nonsense. We've had MBSE for decades. We've also, when I grew up as a young rocket engineer, we were doing simulations. We were having models for our orbital trajectories and others. We've always had models. It's just that these models go larger, are more comprehensive, are becoming more powerful, and hopefully they will hang together, which they don't do at this present time. So we have an evolution. The emerging one is knowledge representation, multi-domain simulation. We do that depending which area, data science, artificial intelligence, machine learning, human-centric designs. There's a lot of things happening there. In the transitioning, like product line engineering, agile methods, designed for resiliency, particularly in the DoD, but also the automotive industry, model-based system engineering, system of systems, they're kind of in a transitioning phase. And in the a standard practice is trade studies, requirements management, function analysis, etc., etc. So my point is, we have system engineering is evolving step by step through its capabilities as the environment is changing and is evolving. One of the key differences of a system 30 years ago, the system today, is software. Software is not a separate discipline. Software is part of a system and is part of a very important part of a system. We have some satellites where 60% of the effort on a satellite is spent on software. So it's not a little subsystem on the side or something which you can treat independently. It is deeply ingrained in anything we do. This is just a chart where a car today has somewhere like 1 billion line of codes. And if I project our spacecraft next to it, this small in terms of total lines of total software, even a big aircraft like a 350 is only this much compared to automotive, which has that much software. So that's something we need to be aware of. Software is part of system engineering, and we better system engineer software as much as we system engineer our mechanical and electrical systems. The three together make the system plus many other things. In summary, our current challenges: tools development, I come back to this one massively, software introduction, and software is part of it, impact of AI in autonomous systems. So, next chapter, where do we have the systems of the future? Where are we moving to? And this is for two totally non-space people from that point of view. So, the first message, total surprise. The digital transformation is going to change everything you do, period. So I just want to leave this in front. Now, this is a much more detailed chart, which gets a second message across. Namely that the digital transformation empowers what we do. If you look into the details day-to-day, what's happening in system engineering, configuration control, change control, mass budgets, power budgets, there's so much, how do I say this politely, primitive, day-to-day manual work happening. The more we can relegate this into a digital tool which we can trust, the more we can focus system engineers on the creative parts of the task and the complex interactions which we cannot model yet and which we don't have any tools for. That's essentially the message of this chart. Now, one point I want to stress is we need to pay more attention on the consumers. The consumers need to be in the central focus of what we do as system engineers. And there's a lot of talk about users all the time, but in practical terms, it often gets forgotten. The key for why we do systems is to give the users additional value. That pays for what we do as engineers, etc., etc. And we, of course, have plenty of information, and this information flows from left to right and up and down, and there's many dimensions. As long as we keep it focused on what is the value that this information brings to the consumer of our systems, the better we are off, the better our companies are off, and the better the system will be accepted. Now, there's a chart which is also not in the vision, but one of my favorite charts, and it comes from a very good colleague, Bryn Watson, from the VP from Lockheed Martin, who 5 years ago in one of our JPL symposium presented this chart, and I was really happy because what she's saying is what is happening, but it's only partially happened today, namely bringing individual tools on mechanical engineering, for manufacturing, for integration tests, for software, and system engineering together into what she calls so wonderfully a digital tapestry. This is where we need to go with whatever we do in tools. We need to make a digital tapestry where individual elements function in such a way that they can be correlated and not manually translated from one tool to the next, but correlated in a way which is as seamless as possible. That's the whole approach of this chart, and it, for me, visually, it gets it fantastically across. Now, this is a not a big surprise, the future of SE is predominantly, it's a nice word, predominantly simulation and model-based, with lots of feedback loops. I've put these feedback loops into this chart because the original chart was without feedback loops, and system engineering without iteration is not doing the right job. Anyway, it is going through a, in this case, linear development from A to C, from analyzing what the task is to deciding about fulfilling the simulation object or building the darn thing. But there is many iteration loops to do that in the right way. And what we need is this integrated systems engineering model simulation environment where, as seamless as possible, we can correlate these various different things, feed them back, etc. This is where AI is going to help us, because at the moment it's manual tasks in many ways, taking the result from one program and then reconverting it so you can stuff it into another program and then get the results back and remodel it again. Drives me crazy. Anyway, digital twins is also a chart which is not in the vision, but it's close to my heart because there's lots of discussion about what is a digital twin. Huge discussions in literature, etc. To me, it's very simple. A digital twin is a digital output of your models and your simulation. It's your database, that's your digital twin, and it is as good as your data is at that given point in time. A digital twin grows from your first analyses, your first digital results on a concept, until you're at a point where it is complete in terms of its data representation, so you can get it into production. That's what a digital twin is. If you go in literature, you get totally confused. It has all kinds of implications, what it is, lots of discussions about formats, about its role, about many, many things. And if I put this one into context of Industry 4.0, it is really at the heart of it, because it is part of the product, part of the manufacturing process and the operational process, because once you have a good digital representation of a system, it's then easy to put it into the production and into the operation service. That's the real key to it. Now, when I present you big charts like this, I know quite well reality is much more complicated. But unless you have a vision of what a digital twin is and what it serves to do, you'll never get out of these complexities of the discussion on a digital twin. Anyway, it will become a very powerful instrument for system engineering if you take it in the way I've just tried to describe it. Now, the next point that may surprise you even more, virtual reality. And lots of discussion of virtual reality, and it starts with assisted reality, which we have in production, in many production environments today, with people are wearing goggles, seeing the data in front of them while they put a pin through a hole or whatever. Augmented reality is one step further, one complexity further, much more information than just your goggles in doing something. Then comes mixed reality, which has many things associated with it, and eventually immersive digital information, immersed virtual reality. These tools are part of system engineering. That's my message to you. Virtual reality or virtualization is part of what we're going to use as system engineers more and more. My dream is to be in a laboratory, three-dimensional, having a representation of a spacecraft, an automotive car, a building, and being able to modify in that three-dimensional room, modify certain things and see what the effect is on some other elements of that same system. Now, I've confused you a lot probably. I'm going to show you how it all fits together. And that's also not in the vision, because I've invented that chart after the vision. I've talked about a lot of different kind of tools now. Now, everybody will agree we had drawing boards. We started out with drawing boards, kind of came to an end. When did they come to an end? Came to an end when we had CAD and CAE. So how does CAE fit in there? It started in the 1950s. I assure you, it took about 40 years before it was really applied industrially at large scale. 40 years of development of the CAD before it was fully operational. MBSE people say it has to be operational tomorrow. Total nonsense. Because MBSE is much more complicated than CAD, so it will take more time. But that's my next chart. We have system design offices. I've not talked about these system design offices, which are, you have in a room all specialists. Their computers are all connected. If somebody changes somewhere in the thermal system, the other guy on the energy system immediately sees what the effect is. He changes his model, feeds it back in. And in this iteration, concurrent way of working, we see a beginning of a real-time systems engineering process. Okay, these are going on, and they're going on even beyond where we are now. Then comes model-based system engineering. I have said as an incoming president in 2002, the future of system engineering is model-based. And believe me, there were not a dozen people in the room who understood what I meant. It was at that time. Today, today for the last 10, 12, 15 years, it's become the going hype. But again, model-based started somewhere in the 1990s. We talked about it at that time. It will go on and will become more capable. You could argue more complex, but to me, it's more important. It becomes more capable as we go. Just like CAD did not stop in the introduction in the 1990s. It's been evolved, it's been better, it's been getting to where it is today, where everybody uses it, and there's a lot of capabilities, small capabilities for simple things, very involved capabilities for very complex, complete automotive or whatever. Same thing is going to happen with model-based system engineering. It evolves step by step. If you have good models for the dynamics of a system, tomorrow we'll have good models for the acoustics, and we can bring the two of them together. That's progress. And that's things which are happening in model-based systems engineering one by one. And now you will ask the question, well, where does virtualization come in? Oops, doesn't. Well, this is our next dimension. The virtualization as a tool to help us in our system design. That's the real issue. And now it's not one or the other. The point is they're all interrelated, and we use CAD also in 10 or 20 years for things where it's the best way to approach it. We use model-based system engineering combined in the system design office with the kind of problems we want to solve then. And we use mixed immersion. No, one piece is missing, which is that. It's a digital twin. I told you the digital twin is the output of your models and simulations in principle. So it draws upon all of the results from all of those tools, because we will need most all of them to digitally characterize our systems. So the digital twin is not the output of model-based system engineering or virtualization. It takes whatever sources of modelization that we were able to bring together. Because all we want to have a system with as close to 100% representation eventually before we go to production as we can have. The fact that we have it only 50% in the conceptual phase is perfectly okay. That's just normal life, and not a critique on what a digital twin can or cannot do. It doesn't come out of nowhere. It's just a result of modelization and digitalization of what we do. Now, one dimension I haven't given you yet, there's a lot of talk about digital threads, authoritative sources of truth, etc. They're just elements of different discussion on the same basic issue. But the thing that I want to introduce here is an additional dimension. Do you know any enterprise? Hello, hello. Do you know any enterprise that does not want to become digital? I don't. They all want to become digital enterprises. Again, that's not a big bang thing. It happens tomorrow. Again, that's an evolution. And we have digital enterprises already. A lot of our startups, for example, they started that way. And the established companies have more difficulties of changing all their processes, etc., towards the digital enterprises. And it goes in parallel to what is being discussed openly, called metaverse. The metaverse, a term which I think Elon Musk has produced, about which Facebook talks a lot about, etc. All that is you're getting into immersive virtualization step by step. And the great chance is, if you look at the movies, if you look at the computer games, or eventually in a few years at Facebook, they're all drawing on similar algorithms, they're drawing on similar digital representations. We can gain from them if we understand what they're doing and bring it into system engineering. I'm now stretching your mind a lot, I know, but sleep about it, think about it. I'm awfully convinced that this is the direction we're going, and this is the direction and how things could fit together, will eventually fit together. It being understood that this scale is log scale. Shouldn't forget that. So the complexities as we go from one to the next are becoming higher. Another point I want to mention is there is a lot of discussion about our acquisition processes. Well, that's an acquisition process by our military or by an industrial consortium such as Airbus or Mercedes or Volvo or whoever. At the moment, it is a process where the primes develop requirements, they throw it into the next tier, and then they eventually make contracts with them. The next tier throws it in the next tier, make contracts with them. An awful lot of bureaucracy associated with that. It needs to change, and it will change and can change as we move forward digitally in a different world. Because if we have the same tools at the OEM level, tier 1, tier 2 adopted, it will be much more easy, and you can take the tier 2, tier 3 and lower tiers into the conceptual phase of creating the next system, which has a lot of legal issues, no question about it. If issue lawyers will be sitting here, they would be jumping up and arguing. It will happen. So another point which we say, we need to go to smart customers sharing information between also government and industry. What happens if the government gives a contract on industry? Big announcement of opportunity, request for proposals, throw it into the industry. Get proposals back, evaluate them, and then start the contract negotiations. It's all fine, it's all normal. But what happens is, in reality, the requirements are being pushed to the maximum because the government needs to prove to their taxpayers. We've asked industry to do the maximum. Industry tries to meet it, sometimes have exceptions or they lie because some requirements can't be done. It's a stupid process. If they were to talk interactively in a smart way with each other, they would realize that if you reduce this requirement here, we could save 3 months in the production cycle. Or we could make it lighter weight or use a different supplier. So these dialogues need to take place in a lot more way. And another chart, which we had in the vision, but it threw out because of the page limitations, is we need to become more flexible as system engineering community. Most of what we do also in INCOSE is focused on prime contractors. I bet you, and I don't have statistics for it, the majority of the system engineers in Sweden, in the US, in Germany, are at tier 2, tier 3, and below levels. Because they need to understand much more than 30 years ago how their pieces fit into a larger system. Nobody would produce a thermostat today without tying it together into the general heating system. And the general heating system needs to be put part of the building construction, building philosophy, etc., etc. So simply, my message is we need to reduce complexity, involve the tier 2, tier 3 suppliers, and make our system engineering methods more flexible, more adaptable to the lower tiers, so we have a better approach to system engineering altogether. This chart will not surprise you at all. Cybersecurity, not only because of Ukraine, etc., but because of our daily life. Cybersecurity is going to be driving much more anything you will do in terms of system designs in the future than ever before. And the data and personal privacy is just as important an element. I said trusted systems, that's just part of trusted systems and why this is becoming so important. Now, building the system engineering workforce has many points. We have a growing need of systems engineers because our systems are becoming more complex and because the various different tiers need to understand better the system complexities and the system context within which they work. We need a functional differentiation. One of my MIT colleagues recently told me we need a system engineer for curating tools. I've never thought of it, but he's right. As our tools become more complex, we need specialist system engineers who can work with these tools, curate them, make sure that not every system engineer has to do that, but that they're made fit for the purpose we need them. We think schools and primary educations need to start looking more into system analysis, comprehending overall systems rather than just looking at stovepipe teaching, etc., etc. Universities are destined for major changes. We think of the fact that today, when we need to know something, we go in the internet. Well, part of the reason, the raison d'etre for universities is provide knowledge to students. So if knowledge is freely available, is that task as important as it used to be? No. The task will be a different one, maybe to teach them how to fit these different pieces of information together and decide between fake and real information. That's going to be one of the changes that needs to come. The other change in universities needs to be these stovepipes need to be tied together much more than ever before. We're doing it, for example, in Delft, my university, by creating energy systems where several factories are together, faculties work together, or space systems where you have 5 faculties working together on space systems and all kinds of ends. So these are the kind of things which are happening. Businesses will need to learn more and more how to support systems engineering and how to grow system engineers, because universities cannot, in the first instance, really grow good system engineers. I'll come back to that. And training providers, we have lots of them and they have an important role. Now, what's the most important prerequisite for excellence in systems engineering?
Curiosity.
Curiosity? Yeah. Good point. Other points? Oh, you must have an answer, every one of you, to that question.
Everything connects.
Everything connects. Good point. No more answers?
Structure.
Structure.
Creativity.
Creativity. Good points. You still don't have my point.
Did anyone say education?
Education. You're getting right there. It's continuous education. We make a big point in the vision, and it comes from our heart, continuous education, because how else could you possibly remain an effective system engineer in a dynamic tools environment with new technologies coming in as we go and accelerating, where we get new regulations, the discipline which has continuous challenges such as sustainability, unless there is continuous education for system engineers, this isn't going to happen the way we think it should be happening. That's a key point which we make very, very strongly in this vision. Now, how should a career look like? And I am very biased in that respect, because I've trained and hired, I don't know, many hundreds of system engineers. And even those with experience, we had to train and train before they were really effective. This is one element of going. Junior engineer becomes eventually a senior engineer, eventually becomes a chief engineer or system integrator, etc. It's not a one-step approach. It's a career evolution. This is a simple way. This is for small companies, and it's happening like this. More complicated, which is true for most larger organizations. We come from university as junior engineers, junior system engineers, junior project managers, and then go on to senior system engineer, senior engineer, and there's various ways, eventually become chief engineer or project manager, whatever. In that way, there is a growth of system engineers from a junior engineer, where he takes a, we say in my terms, an attitude control system or a suspension system in a car. When he is a master in system engineering, he can work on a suspension system of a car, even though he needs to learn a lot about sensoric and data and security, etc., etc. Then he eventually grows on to become a real system engineer, chief system engineer, or project manager. And in my way, and we've talked about this over lunch, in my way, project managers need to have been system engineers before, at least in my world of creating complex products. So, almost through. There is something I want to just draw your attention to this chart. We have an example in there. It's a wonderful example which Chris Davey made up. An example that illustrates in practical terms the functions of a system engineer in 2035 being responsible for a city emergency situation. And in this case, it's a young lady which we've invented. We call this a day in the life of a system engineer. It's 5 pages long. Take a look at it. You'll get a lot of practical feedback as to what needs to happen in 2035 to be a good system engineer, what kind of functions, what kind of reactions, etc., etc. So in summary, the future of SE, it's model-based and virtual reality-based. Tom, again, for you, I've underlined this virtual reality-based more than we have it in addition for reasons we can talk over in a beer. System engineering with project management will be strong actors for enabling digital enterprises. Not talked a lot about digital enterprises, but how do you think digital enterprises come about if they're not really system engineered in a step-by-step approach to become digital? I see a number of enterprises are trying to do that in an ad hoc way here, an ad hoc way there, an ad hoc way there. Doesn't fit together. Slight catastrophe. AI, not talked a lot about AI. I'd like to talk an hour about AI, but cannot. And other technologies will impact our practice and our system designs massively. And I talked a lot about trusted, cybersecure, etc., sustainable systems. Education, I've also some insights in how I think there and what you will see part of the, oops. Last chapter, very quick. How do we propose to realize the vision? Well, there is a path forward which we've laid out, which recognizes that there's a lot of cultural change in making all of this happen. And without cultural change, digital enterprises will not exist. This knowledge base needs to be evolved, and we need to achieve the vision through lots of collaboration with other organizations. And in addition to that, we have established 9 what we call challenges, system engineering challenges, which fall in the category application, practices, tools, research, and competencies. I will not go through those, but you have them in detail in the vision web or the vision document. We even have a roadmap there, which is a fantastic work from our Cambridge colleague in putting all these developments into a timeline and into context and show the interrelationships, etc. We started with some of those challenges already, and Tom with Ralph will be will have a lot to do with making sure this is happening. The realization of it is what we suggest is global collaboration. It doesn't have to be in INCOSE at all, it can be anywhere. We have NAFEMS, connections, AIAA, PMI, IEEE, others. We entice them to do that because there is only one system engineering vision in this world, from what I know. And that's fortunately one that we've done in INCOSE. So I want to express an invitation to all of you also for this chapter. Go take the material, teach it, bring it to your colleagues, build a system engineering vision for the Swedish chapter, which is tailored to your industry and the needs of your membership and things like this. We had already from the 25 vision, we had an automotive vision, which was a derivative of it. and we had a Dutch vision, which was focused on their infrastructure clients, because they have a lot of building companies, transport industries, etc. there. So you're invited to use it in whichever way it fits. In summary, well, there's lots of things in there. In view of the time, I'm not going through. I've talked about, I think, most of those. You'll find them elaborated a little bit more in the document itself. Now, a few last charts. What purpose does a vision serve? That's really the question, because a vision looks at a 10 to 20-year perspective. And the key question is really, where is the place of a vision in the hierarchy of organizational governance? It's, in my view, very simple. A vision should inspire the strategy, but that's a strategy of a university, or the strategy of an industry, of a government organization, doesn't matter. If an organization doesn't have a vision where they want to be in, let's say, 10 years or more, well, the strategy is not so sure. And obviously the strategy influences the operating plan. That's where most of the effort is all about in every company, every university, every organization, the budget of tomorrow. That's where the fight's on, because if you don't get enough budget, you're a loser or winner or whatever. Anyway, the vision has this inspiring longer-term view as to where should an organization move to. And we feel this vision is a treasure chest for lots of applications across students, academia, professional societies, executives, etc., etc. So we've had lots of executives also involved in the review of it, and lots of them have clung onto it. And this is the story I want to leave you with, and it was one of the most difficult battles I've had in INCOSE for a few years. I said, we don't want this vision to be copyrighted, because copywriting means we keep it to ourselves, we put a fence around it. So we finally cut through this. It has no copyright. You can use it in any way you want it. For a lecture, use only one chart, modify 7 charts, whichever way, it doesn't matter. We want this message to go out to anybody who has a systems interest, except when it's for commercial uses, then we want to have a say. But you don't need to ask permission to use the vision in whichever way you want. It's for you, it's a resource for you to use. Anybody ever heard of Nostradamus? Aha. Well, our vision isn't going to take that long, survive that long. And it's fun nonetheless. So, are all our prophecies going to happen? Well, the answer is obvious. Certainly not. Cannot. But I think, because there will be disruptive things happening, and we see one happening in Ukraine wars, which are going to change a lot of the international relationships, many other things. But if this vision can inspire you and your organizations to advance and adjust their professional path, then we're going to be happy. We speak for the vision team. That's really what I wanted to convey. And I have one last chart. Tom, it's my last chart. It's difficult to make predictions, especially about the future. Nonetheless, we have tried. The best way to predict the future is to invent it. Is one way of looking at it, or your task is not to foresee the future, but to enable it. Everything is right. And Chinese proverb, every journey starts with the first step. And one of my favorite cartoonists, the German cartoonist, Die Zukunft war früher auch besser, meaning the future was better in the past. So with this, I want to leave you. Thank you, and open for questions, suggestions, whatever. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, and please thank you. I think we have at least one or two questions. Was it Marianne who had a question? I think, why don't you pose your question? Just unmute, and if that's possible.
I didn't have a question. I just said, can you let Helena in to the meeting?
Oh, sorry.
Because she has been in the lobby for a while.
All right.
That's what's my question.
Right.
Very good presentation, though. Oh.
So you don't have a question while you're at it?
No, not. But very good presentation. Thank you a lot.
Thank you. Right. Okay. Anybody else who has a question here? I can just reflect on. We have one here. So, Janne, you will need to speak up.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned thing about it. I mean, one of the biggest obstacles we have is that when trying to implement systems engineering or mentioning systems engineering, it always ends up in the corner where you have other buzzwords like agile, safe, or yeah, you know what
I know.
I mean, you showed us your chart where you had the early ships in history and pyramids. I mean, we already know engineering and have done that for 700s of thousands of years, and we just have formalized it to systems engineering during the 50s. But still, people don't really understand that they are doing systems engineering every day. But I don't believe in systems engineering. I think we go safe instead. So that's the biggest struggle that we have, that how to really get people to realize that it's not anything new. It's just common sense and just something to do. It's a lot of work, but you have to do it.
Yes, of course, I've been in a very comfortable situation all my life working in space. Without system engineering, no satellite will ever work, and no launcher will ever go up. So I've had the chance to propagate it within and formalize it a bit within the European space community, etc. But I've always insisted system engineering is focused on the product and not on the process. There's too many process people, and there's lots of people, and in our German Bundeswehr, there is, I think, 50% of the people employed in the ministries just prescribe what other people have to do. I mean, you shoot yourself in the head. This is why the German Bundeswehr is in the lousy shape as it is. We need to focus it on engineering, integral engineering, and prove the better analysis or the better system design that it has its value. It's, you know, the debates, theoretical debates up there in the boardrooms, they don't bring anything. The vision can help a little bit because we're trying at least to provide some arguments for where it will go, which some of the people in the boardrooms have maybe not thought about. And realizing that they don't become a digital enterprise without doing it in a systematic way, call it system engineering or not, doesn't matter, is something which is difficult to comprehend if you have a legal or financial or whatever background. Keep on fighting.
Yeah.
You used my word because I used to talk the digital the system engineering is enabled for digitalization. That's what use the word enable, not then we can.
Good point.
I don't believe in systems engineering, so let's do a digital twin.
Okay, we have one question here.
Yeah, so you were talking about focusing on the user, like what are the needs, how is it going to be used? Would you say that it needs to be, the whole organization has to switch its focus and think in terms of their users for systems engineering to work?
Well, the automotive industry is a very good example of they design everything around the driver and the passengers. They really, because they're in a heavy competition. If Mercedes does it worse than Volvo, then they're going to lose a few customers. So they're really an exceptional industry, which is very much focused on the users. But in our more, how do I say that, aloof industries like transport industry, logistics industries, it's not necessarily the same straightforward focus. And the reason why I put up the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals as number one is this is the eventual focus, because this represents human needs. And this is an argument which you can use in any board discussion, because everybody has understood by now that sustainability is something they cannot live without. And digital transformation they cannot evade. And there's a few other of those mega trends which they need to face and actively do something about. Other industries like this, there's plenty of industries that have done this, and others have gone this way.
Okay, well, I think maybe
You had some?
should we have one more? Okay,
Sorry.
you're the last one.
Yeah, I just made a reflection, because you're talking about focusing on the user, and you have these graphs, and everyone has seen them on complexity growth, like an exponential curve. But the evolution of the human is not an exponential. It takes many, many generations for us to change. So I was thinking about the contradictions between, one hand, human-centric design versus complexity growth, and the other one is trustworthiness versus technology growth. And in the middle of that is the systems engineer. So we need to address all this increasing complexity, but making it usable, human-centric, and feasible, and not complex for the user. Do we have the tools managing that complexity today? Do we need something? Are we lacking something in our toolbox as systems engineers?
We're lacking a lot, but we have a toolbox up there. Don't underestimate it. We had practically no tools. We've done our first rockets by slide rules, and they worked. I mean, we have so much more tools today, but we had good education, we had good brains, we had intense discussions in teams, and we arrived there. We did system engineering, even though the term didn't exist at that time. So it's this, I say our two things. Firstly, job of a system engineer is to keep things simple. And second, to use her or his common sense. So much of system engineering is common sense, but common sense comes, of course, from experience, from deep knowledge of the technical disciplines and many other things. So common sense doesn't come like this, it comes as part of your engineering. That's why I'm a strong proponent for postgraduate education for system engineers. The word Bachelor of System Engineering for me is a horror. There's 65 programs in the US, Bachelors of System Engineering. They're doing a disservice to the profession. It's a catastrophe. In my view, for my world of complex systems. It's my soapbox.
All right. Okay. Well, I think I'd just like to comment on the common phrase that's been used now, common sense phrase, because I think if you look at systems engineering, it all makes sense, right? You know, start with the need and finish with the balanced solution, all that. unfortunately not so commonly practiced. But I think there's a big difference of doing systems engineering and doing systems engineering well. Because I mean, I think, and that's why these kind of, you know, the continuous education, having a vision to strive for really helps. Just before we leave it, Heinz, this document, would you give this, who would you give this to? I mean, outside maybe our community, because I'm a bit cautious about it's really our strategic document. It's not something you put in the hands of somebody who's not know systems engineering, because the values of systems engineering may not be forwarded.
Well, a side remark, we also have an executive summary of this document of 6 or 8 pages that already helps to give it to somebody who is not an engineer or not concerned with it. But I know that the current board of directors, with your help, are working on simplifying some of those messages. If you were in system engineers here, I would never have given this presentation that way, because 80% of the audiences will be totally lost. So there is some work which is happening as we speak to simplify some of the messages and put them more into a PR kind of language and context, etc. And I think that's important to get system engineering across to policymakers, to financial CTOs, others, etc.
Very good.
A comment to that thing. I think all what you say is you're grasping on the problem of just doing all this. And I think that the last thing you talked about, Heinz, is that there are so many so-called stakeholders. We have the vocabulary for this. We have the model for this. So if we have the model of the stakeholders, the viewpoints, and the concerns regarding the object of systems engineering, because we professionals has one viewpoint and one need, and not some kind of stakeholders for others. And also, I like the chart with the career there, because there you see that you will not end as a systems engineer if you evolve. If you evolve, you will end like a chief engineer, for instance. And you cannot be chief engineer without having been a systems engineer for a time. And you cannot be a program manager if you do not have been a chief engineer and a systems engineer for a time for a complex system. And in the old days, no one did know about this, so you could be a program manager just by getting the charter and the responsibility for something and the funding. So this is a map that we understand what it means, and the question is that how do we educate and how do you follow this chart that we have put up there? Because most people don't understand what we're talking about, even if they see the words and they see the connection, but they don't understand the implication, and they don't understand how to do it, and they don't understand the benefits, and they don't know why they should do it. And what that is a problem for the systems engineers, not from the others.
I can only concur with you.
And I think that's actually, I mean, where we actually talk about this is the document for us systems engineers, and there may be another document for those that we would like to bring into this that shows the values and the benefits that we bring in.
Yeah.
And that was Janne said
Yeah.
also. I mean, you cannot explain this because the wrong person in the wrong way.
Okay, I think we could go on very long. Thank you, Heinz.
Very good.
Just to make a bit of commercial, already on Thursday, day after today, we have a small webinar in Swedish for the introducing the working groups to those that would like to hear about those. On the 7th of April, we have again one of our international webinars, which would be on the guide to the application of Unified Architecture Framework with James Martin. So again, one of those that will be probably globally attended. All right, so with that, again, thank you, Heinz, and thank you for in the audience And I think this is our short little break. We should have a few minutes to reorganize ourselves for the årsmötet, the annual meeting. So those online internationally, thank you for joining, and hope to see you soon again.